Okay, so for those of you who are still finishing, take a minute to do that. But for those of you who are finished, what questions came up on Test 4, Part 2, other than the 3, obviously, that I can't go over because some people are still finishing that quiz? Riley? Number 12. 20. Which of the following is equivalent to? Okay, so I'll tell you one thing. It's an exponent rule problem, so you've got to simplify out the negative exponent first, so that anytime something's raised to a negative exponent, we have to bring the base is 32, to the denominator, and now it's going to be raised to the 4/5 power. So that's the first piece. But then from there, so that whole movement to the denominator made your numerator, made your exponent positive. From there, it's this kind of denominator x to the numerator flashcard idea, where this denominator is going to go out in front. So it's 1 over the 5th root of 32 to the 4th power. And that to the 4th power can go underneath the radical or outside the radical, does not really matter. It makes more sense to me, rather than taking 32 and raising it to the 4th power first, because that would be way huge of a number. It makes sense to take the 5th root of 32, so what times itself 5 times gives you 32, and that would be 2 to the 4th power still, and then 2 to the 4th power is 16, so this becomes 1/16, which is option 1. Okay, that was the moral of the story on number 20. However, and I actually don't think they would give us something this straightforward, because you could have just typed that into your calculator. You'd get a decimal, and then you would check 1 divided by 16 is the same decimal answer. Or you could change your decimal to a fraction. So this could just be typed into your calculator. My guess is they would write something like this with variables, like x to the negative a over b power, and say which of the following is equivalent to that. That seems like something more Common Core, because they know you can type things into your calculator. They're not stupid. They know that you can do that, so they want to really see if you know these properties that we just went over. Cool? If they say do it algebraically and you're showing them what you're typing into the calculator, no, that doesn't count. No. If you can come up with a specific example that you're talking about at some point and show it to me, I'll double check. But usually algebraically means you set up your own equation, you solve your equation by hand. In the process, you might need to do use the calculator to figure out what 15 times 27 is, or something, and that's fine. But the kind of core of the problem has to be done algebraically. Other questions? Go ahead. 12. Oh, 12. I must have known that was a hard one. So this gives us a table of values and essentially asks us to determine the percent rate of change in the function and whether it represents growth or decay. So first and foremost, look at your numbers. They're decreasing, so it's definitely decay. So it's going to be 1 or 2. Yes? Okay. Then we want to see by about how much. So this is like one of our writing the equations of a exponential function. So y equals a times b to the x power, where we plug in a point for x and y, like 1 in 2160. And we also do it again for another point, x and y. We plug in 2, 16, 20. And we divide. It's a system, but not a substitution or elimination. We would divide these and see what we get. So 2160 divided by 1620 gives us 1.3, repeating. The a's cancel. That was the whole beauty of it. Equals b to the negative first power, because this divided by this means you subtract your exponents. And then you raise each side to the negative first power, and that will give you your b value. So y equals sum a times a b of 0.75 to the x power. Okay? What they're asking for is the rate of decay. Okay, this is your 1 minus some R value. So what percentage off of 100% is this? 25%. So it's decaying by 25% each year. Okay? If it's this number here, when it's all simplified, that tells you what it's retaining. So it's retaining 75% of its value every year, and if it's retaining 75% of its value, that means it's losing 25%. Okay? Other questions? Chance? 17, we have, I can't do that one right, well, I can't do that one right now because some quizzes are still out. I need your quizzes. Thank you. I am going to sketch this one out though, because thank you. Okay, I have all the quizzes. Okay, this one's a little bit different. It's the focus directrix one than what we are used to. And I don't think this would happen on the Regents, but I do want to discuss it. Again, giving you the focus and directrix, that's a normal issue. Giving you a directrix like this, which is a vertical line, is a little less normal. So I've sketched this out. Here's the focus at 8,2. And the directrix is now x equals 6. So when you come up with the vertex, it's still going to be halfway in between. And still your parabola is going to bend away from the directrix always to include the focus. And still your whole point to directrix, point to focus is going to be the same concept. Your directrix point, though, is 6, y. So all of a sudden you know the x-coordinate, but you don't know the y-coordinate. This is a generic point, xy, and this is obviously 8,2. So when we set up our point, so this is a sideways parabola, which is not very common. But the process is the same. Point to directrix, distance formula would be x minus 6 squared plus y minus y squared. And then point to focus is going to be x minus 8 squared plus y minus 2 squared. So what's slightly different about this is because it's a sideways parabola, usually our x minus x is what always had given us 0. Here it's just the y minus y. Something should always give you 0. And then we have 2 of the 3 that are the same variable. And those are the 2 that we're going to square out. Your square roots cancel on both sides regardless. These are the 2 that you're going to square out. Jacob, you only square out 2 of the 3 of these, not all 3. So we're going to square out the 2 that are the same. That's the left-hand side. And then the x is on the right.
You said the equation.
And then this I'm going to leave alone. And then just like our y squareds would have canceled out, here our x squareds are going to cancel out. And now instead of solving for y, we're solving for x. Very similar, but obviously different, right? Because on a typical parabola where it's right side up, you end up your y squared cancel and you solve for y and you have an x minus something still in parentheses. So when I wrote the homework quiz, I did change that so it was more familiar and what we're used to. So I kind of set this one up. See, I made it a horizontal directrix. So your vertex is halfway in between there at 8,5, although we don't, we never cross the directrix, we bend away from it. So here's my point xy, and here's the point on the directrix, which is x comma 6, because the y-coordinate is 6. And now for my distance formula, point to focus, point to directrix, I get point to focus, x minus 8 squared plus y minus 4 squared equals x minus x squared. There's our one that's going to be 0 and gone, plus y minus 6 squared. Your square roots are gone. So I've got an x term, a y term, and a y term. So I square out the 2 y's and I leave the x's alone. So it's going to be y squared minus 8y plus 16 on the left, and y squared minus 12y plus 36 on the right. And now again, my y squareds cancel, and I want to get all my y's together. So I'm going to add my 8y over. That's going to get rid of that. I'm going to subtract this 36 over. That's going to get rid of that. So I have x minus 8 squared. 16 minus 36 is minus 20 equals negative 12y plus the 8y is going to be negative 4y. And then I divide everything by negative 4. Divide this term by negative 4, divide this term by negative 4, divide this term by negative 4. So here's where my a kind of finally comes up. This is technically a 1. So negative 1/4 x minus 8 squared plus 5 equals y. And there's my function. There's my a value, there's my h, there's my k. This is the formula you have to memorize on your flashcards for a vertex form of a parabola. Your hk is your vertex, 8,5. And sure enough, 8,5 was that checks out. And our a value is negative 1/4. And sure enough, this a is upside down at least, so we know the negative is right. Okay? On number 2 on your sheet, the SOAR formula. It's one of your new flashcards. S stands for arc length. So if your arc is 5 units, S should have been 5. On the unit circle gives us the radius of 1. So theta times 1, and we're just looking for the value of theta. So we divide both sides by 1, and theta equals 5 radians, because this formula is always an angle measure in radians. Okay?
So don't we have some last today?
Yep, and last but not least, the remainder theorem. Here's what your flashcard says about the remainder theorem. If f of k equals 0, then x minus k is a factor. So if you're determining whether or not this is a factor, and it says to use the remainder theorem, long division does not count. Okay? If it says to use the remainder theorem, you need to know to plug in negative 2. So I would do p of negative 2, and whatever I get, that's what my remainder should be. Oh, this is a long one. So I would type all of this just into my calculator, making sure you're using the parentheses, because the negative base is a little bit tricky. Negative 2 to the 5th plus 2 times negative 2 to the 4th minus 3 times negative 2 to the 3rd minus 6 times negative 2 squared minus 6 times negative 2 minus 12. And I get 0. So the root of negative 2 has a remainder of 0. So is it a factor? Yes. Justify your answer, and there's my answer justified. If you get 0 when you plug it in, the remainder was 0, and therefore it's a factor. If you get any other number as a remainder, or as your output, then that was your remainder, and it's not a factor if that's any other number. Okie doke? Okay. Anything else on the homework? All right, pass it forward, and we'll do our flashcard quizzes. Remember, we're doing 6 of these today. Also remember, your stakes this week on those quizzes that you just took and that we just went over are much higher. Those 5 quizzes that you take this week are being averaged together as a test score. Okay, so the quiz, all of your quiz scores, yes. All of your quiz scores that you've taken so far, those are all quiz grades. They're all in your grade portal. Like I said, the results have been extreme. Some people are doing much better than normal because they know exactly what 15 questions to study. They're doing it, and next day is no problem. Then the rest of you are bombing because you're just not preparing accordingly or appropriately for those tests. You're not fully maybe understanding what the problem is actually doing, so that when the numbers are changed just a tiny bit, you still know how to do it. Okay? To me, there's no excuse for not getting 90s and 100s on these. You know the 15 questions. Okay? 80s, 90s, and 100s I'm happy with, because yeah, you're going to make a small mistake. But if you're clueless, then what are you studying? You have the answers in front of you. So if someone wants to stay after and shed some light on what the problem is that I'm missing and how this could be difficult for some of you, you know, to me, if you're getting 20s and 30s, you're just not preparing. Okay? and that needs to change, because these 5 this week, nothing's getting dropped, these 5 are being averaged together as a test score. All right, memorization quiz. There's your first. Make sure you tell me what having a discriminant greater than 0 tells you, less than 0 tells you, and equal to 0 tells you. Because that's on the back of the flashcard as well.
Yeah.
Okay, here's your next one. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. Here's your next one.
I don't get it.
Okay, then skip it. And then review your flashcards again tonight. And the last one. Okay, pass those forward. Jacob.
I don't know what I'm saying.
Thank you. Yep, yes. What's the arc length formula, Jake? Good.
As equals,
Yep, arc length formula, the SOAR formula. We just used it in your homework. Polynomial function format. Polynomial functions are the type that, yes, I have one drawn on the back, kind of do that. So it's the A, which kind of gives you, opens up, opens down, starts high, ends low, starts low, ends high, and then minus each root. So this root would have a multiplicity of 1, so that's an M1. This root, it just cuts straight through, so that would have a multiplicity of 1. This root bounces, so that would have a multiplicity of 2, but it's always x minus the root, x minus the root, x minus the root.
that's all about that test 5.
Margin of error,
That test 5.
2 times the standard deviation. X-intercept, set y equal to 0. Point slope format is for a line. That's how you write equations of lines. And the discriminant kind of tells you what type of solutions you have. That's the discriminant. If it's positive, you have 2 real solutions. If it's negative, you have 2 imaginary solutions. And if it equals 0, you have exactly 1 solution. Okay? Take out a separate sheet of paper for your notes.
What about test 5?
What about it, Jake?
Are we going to print it?
We will talk about that before you go. So the only questions we haven't gotten to on test 4 are obviously the few that were not assigned. So that's what we're going to look at right now. I believe we did 21, so I'm just going to pick up with 22.
We did 24, and then...
Did we do 20? We did do 24, you're right. We did 21 and 24, correct?
Yeah.
22 I knew we were kind of short on time, so we wouldn't get to, but we will today. Okay? When a student is selected At random, from a population, the probability that the student has a smartphone is 68%. The probability that the student has an electronic tablet is 0.36. And the probability that a student has both a smartphone and an electronic tablet is 0.09. So this should scream Venn diagram too. I have a smartphone circle and a tablet circle. So they're saying A is let A be the smartphone event and let B be the tablet event. Anytime you're filling in a Venn diagram, you want to start with the inside. If you can, if they give it to you. If they don't give it to you, you still want to find it out first. They did give it to us. It was 0.09. And then the probability that the student has a smartphone is 0.68. Well, that means your entire smartphone circle needs to add up to 0.68. 0.09 of that is already accounted for. So if I subtract 0.09, that only leaves me with 0.59 for the kids who own a smartphone but not a tablet. And the tablet total was supposed to be 0.36. Again, 0.09 of that is already accounted for, so that's 0.27. So now they're asking for the probability of A given B, which means which circle are we only looking at? B, given B. So looking at just this circle, so it's out of 0.36. How many of those are also in A? 0.09. And 0.09 out of 0.36 is 25%. 0.25, 25%. Answer 3.
Do you think I do better on the...
I'll have to look. I haven't looked at them yet.
I have to do better.
Good. Number 23 is just a solving. It's a rational equation. What do you have to do first in a rational equation? Get a common denominator. So this one is over 1, which means it needs an x plus 3. And then all your denominators are x plus 3, so we can drop them all, right? I have to multiply out this numerator. I get x squared plus 3x minus 15 equals 5x. And what type of equation is this now that we have to solve? Quadratic. Get it equal to 0, so subtract over your 5x. And factor if you can. If it's not factorable, we'll go to the formula, but we always want to try factoring first.
And negative 5 and plus 3.
Very good. I know some of us are quicker at that than others. And then your two answers are x equals 5, x equals negative 3, and any equation that we're solving, we need to check for extraneous. Are either of those solutions going to give us something undefined or not true? Tyler? Negative 3, if we plug it back in, we're going to get 15 divided by 0, which is a problem, or 5x divided by 0, which is a problem. So we have to reject that one, and your only answer is x equals 5. Sometimes they'll both work, sometimes none will work. And in a lot of cases, one of the two will work. So 23 is option 5. Look at their solution. They have negative 3 and 5, but when you look at this, guys, even before solving, you should know 1 and 3 are out. Negative 3 as your x would be a problem. So 1 and 3 are definitely out. Comes down to 2 and 4. That's even before you do anything, right? You could always, with a multiple choice, just plug in your answers and check them. Okay? So from there, that finishes the multiple choice. We need to run to 32. Little trig question here. Use the picture of the unit circle to prove the Pythagorean identity, to prove that sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. Okay, let me ask you something here. Sine is what over what? SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to say that the sine of theta is the opposite side length is y, right? Over the hypotenuse is 1. So in my picture, the sine of theta equals y. Okay? The cosine of theta is what over what? adjacent over hypotenuse. That's going to be an x over 1, or just x. So when I want to prove that this is true, I'm going to start with the Pythagorean theorem and the fact that x squared plus y squared is supposed to equal 1 squared. So by Pythagorean theorem, x squared plus y squared equals 1. And from SOHCAHTOA, I knew this already, so I substitute, and I'm going to take out the x and replace it with cosine theta. I'm going to take out the y and replace it with sine theta. And I get cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1, and my proof is done. Okay, the Pythagorean identity, the fact that sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1, comes from the Pythagorean theorem that you guys know about. Okay, and then 36. Completely factor this. So I'm going to write that down, that function, x cubed plus x squared minus 9x minus 9. When you're asked to factor something that's got 4 terms, what's your first try? What's your first method? Grouping. Pull out an x squared. I'm left with x plus 1. What do I pull out of the second group? Negative 9. I'm left with x plus 1. Was it factorable by grouping? Did it work? It did, because these match. So my x plus 1, I'll pull out in front, and I'm left with x squared minus 9. If it was not factorable by grouping, the only way to factor is by long division. Okay? The problem with long division, though, is you need to know some factor to divide out first. They would have to tell you that. They would have to tell you a root so you could know what factor to divide out. And then this factors further into conjugates of x plus 3, x minus 3. So that's completely factored now. Use your answer to sketch a graph. So very quickly here, we've got a root where? Negative 1. We've got a root where? Negative 3. And we've got a root where? Positive 3. And correct me if I'm wrong, they're all single roots, right? Nothing has a multiplicity higher than 1. Based on the fact that it's a cubic function, does it start low and high or start high and low?
Start high and low.
So it's going to start up and go down, so it's got a negative slope overall. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
No. That's a positive coefficient. It's got a positive slope overall. So it starts low, has to hit all these roots, and it should naturally end high. Okay? Homework tonight is test 5. First section on it, 1 through 10. I'll give you those numbers right there in case we, obviously it's on the web page and so on. And the solutions are there as well.